All right, we get started with 1 cup of non-dairy milk. The recipe calls for soy milk, but I used half coconut, half oat milk. That's just what I have in the fridge. Well, make sure your other camera is on before you complete your initial pour. There you go. And just eyeball a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Next, a 1/4 cup of sugar. Then the recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of flour, but I'm also gluten-free, so I use cornstarch. Just get it out of the ramekin however you can. All right, now 2 tablespoons of a neutral flavored oil. I used canola, and a tablespoon of lemon juice. You can also use white vinegar, just any sort of acid works perfectly fine. Whisk it together constantly, nice and slow, steady, or fast, however you want, to make sure that it doesn't stay sticky and weird on the bottom, and that it's constantly heating all the way through. Just whisk until you realize that your arm is in the way of your own camera. Ignore the problem until you have to eventually remake this recipe regardless. It's gonna feel like it takes a second to really start thickening up. But once it starts thickening, you're gonna wanna take it off the heat as soon as possible. You want a nice custard, like a thick set pudding, just like you would bite into the middle of a Boston cream donut. That's the kind of texture that you're going for. It goes from liquidy to goopy pretty fast. It might be the cornstarch I use in my own recipe. I will be experimenting with this in the near future. Remember that there's no audio in the video, you do a voiceover after, so feel free to turn on your favorite podcast. This recipe is set to an episode of Home Cooking. You see how it gets thick so quickly? You want to keep stirring it, but you want to take it off the heat before it, because the pan is still hot and it's going to keep cooking it. See how it gets gloopy very fast? You got to take it off the heat. Take it off the heat. Don't worry about your podcast. Take your pastry cream off the heat. And you've made glue. Congratulations. All right, let's try this again. We begin with our medium saucepan on medium-high heat, like last time. 1 cup non-dairy milk. Here I'm using a combination of coconut and oat. Use whatever you want. 1/4 cup white sugar. 1/4 cup of flour. Here I'm using half oat, half cornstarch. A tablespoon of vinegar and 2 tablespoons of neutral flavored oil. Whisk together until the desired consistency, which is again that kind of pudding consistency or custard that you haven't baked quite yet. You may take a spoon if it covers the back of the spoon, if it tastes right in your mouth, if it's whisking properly in the bowl. Those are all excellent indicators that you're right. Remove it from the heat and just keep whisking so it doesn't burn on the bottom. Oops, I forgot a couple of ingredients. The recipe calls for a teaspoon of vanilla. I'm using a splash. Just mix that in until it's incorporated. And I'm using a sprinkle of salt this time to kind of cut that vinegar taste. I don't recommend using vinegar. I definitely recommend using lemon juice like the recipe calls for. Transfer into a metal or glass bowl. I use a small one here. Cover with plastic so that it touches and makes a seal directly onto the custard itself so it doesn't form a skin in the fridge. And voila! When it cools off, it's ready for piping. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to click that bell.